Donald Trump is a career criminal. His father, who was a monster of a human being, he jumps out of the car, runs to the sidewalk, picks up the quarter, holds it up in little Johnny's face and says, "It's mine now."
Oh my God.
What kind of person does that at all, but especially to a 7-year-old boy?
When Operation Sindoor was taking place, the military operations which India conducted against the terrorists and the state of Pakistan. So why did Donald Trump choose to call General Asim Munir?
He has no idea of the history. It wouldn't dawn on him that by inviting the head of the military of Pakistan, which hid Osama bin Laden in military
cantonment.
Yeah.
Did Donald Trump get to be friends with Elon Musk, and why did the friendship or the bonhomie not last? What made them come together and what made them fall apart?
With Donald, all relationships are transactional. They are one way. They are absolutely one-way relationships. Well, Navin, you can give me this permit, or I'm going to give your wife these photographs. And
please don't. Welcome to our show, friends, on kyonghantibajee. We are honored to have Professor David K. Johnston. David K. Johnston is the winner of the Pulitzer Prize for beat reporting in 2001, and he's a specialist in economic and tax issues. He's been a fantastic journalist who's been respected all over the world for his reporting, investigative journalism, and his truthful talks. So welcome to our show, David K. Would you like to say something to the people of India and USA and Canada?
Well, Navin, thank you for having me on. I'm the parent of a dual citizen who emigrated to Canada largely over the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I'm, as you learned about me, frequently on several different channels in India as a guest.
Yes.
And delighted to be on with you from Rochester, New York.
Thank you so much. So I begin with this very interesting thing. The show is named as Who is Donald Trump? Basically, this revolves around the behavior of how Donald Trump treats people, how the United States of America is conducting its foreign policy, and we'll go on. It's going to be an impromptu thing. I don't really basically rehearse anything. And I have today written a list of questions because you're there on our channel, so I don't want to forget asking you anything. So I would say that when did you first meet Donald Trump? How many years has it been? And what did you find about him?
I first met Donald Trump in June of 1988. Okay. I had been an investigative reporter at the LA Times for a dozen years, and I was the first person to seriously investigate the LAPD. And my other investigations had ticked off so many powerful people in Los Angeles that the paper didn't want to go where I was pushing it. So I left and I went to the Philadelphia Inquirer, which, like the LA Times, was a very literary newspaper, but had a hard edge instead of a soft edge. And I went there to cover Atlantic City because I believed casinos were about to erupt all across America due to a Supreme Court decision in late 1987. And I met Donald just for a handshake, a greeting, a couple of days after I arrived. And then a week or two later, we sat down for the first of many interviews. I've spent several hundred hours with him over the years.
100 hours?
Several hundred hours over the years.
100 hours, oh my God.
Yeah.
You're lucky.
I spent a lot of time with Donald, including, time on the phone. And in between the handshake and then interviewing him, he was the only interesting character in town. The casinos were all owned by publicly traded companies, and the people who ran them were just typical corporate managers in suits. They were boring. They were competent, but boring. But Donald was clearly a character, and I had read the book, The Art of the Deal, and I had read a lot of material about him. And the first thing that happened was the owner of a competing casino, whom I met at a soiree, said to me, "Well, he's a complete con. He's a fraud. He doesn't know what he's doing," and a lot of foul language about what a messed up operation Trump had.
Hmm.
And I was sort of struck by this and by the vigor of it. And then I went and started meeting state regulators who would say to me, Donald is not an operator. And I'd say, what does that mean? And they'd say, well, you'll find out, but Donald is not an operator. He owned 2 casinos. I then started to meet his guys. And as soon as they concluded they trusted me, and I lecture all over the world on how to get people to trust you. I've had people confess to murder, tell me how much their second mistress cost, all sorts of things through interviewing techniques. They started telling me that, yeah, he's a complete incompetent. He has no idea what he's doing. It's all fraud. And with their connivance, I drafted 4 questions to ask Trump when I was going to sit down with him in, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so I wrote them in the back of my reporter's notebook. And as we're going along in the interview, I flipped it open, I looked at it, and I asked him one of the questions, which was about the game of craps. His answer told me immediately that he knew nothing about the game of craps. It's a dice game. And that he was giving me the answer he thought I wanted to hear. And I asked 3 more questions during this 90-minute, 2-hour interview, something like that, where he did the same thing. And having just moved from California to Atlantic City, I had been seeing on TV in California ads for psychics. Does your husband have a mistress? Is your girlfriend going to leave you? Call us. We're the California psychics. We know.
We know everything.
Right. And of course, it's just a con job where you listen for signals.
Yes.
And I thought, my goodness, this guy is straight out of, hi, we're the California psychics. He's picking up on what he thinks I want to hear and running with it. And as I pointed out, he did this with the NBC News anchor 10 years ago. Not as blatantly, but very clearly he was trying to answer what he thought the guy wanted to hear rather than address the real issue. So immediately I recognized that, yeah, this guy's a con artist. And Donald Trump is not who the overwhelming majority of people think he is. And so your audience should know that everything you're going to hear me say about Donald Trump, I can back up with his own words, public documents. There are lots of things I know from sources I don't name and I can't quite prove, so I don't tell you about those things. But I can tell you this summarily. Donald Trump is a career criminal. He is the 3rd generation head of a 4-generation white-collar crime family. We have a number of these white-collar crime families in America and in other parts of the world. These are not people who break your leg or shoot you or smash the windows of your retail store. They cheat with promises they don't intend to keep, borrowing money they don't intend to pay back, or at least not as promised, with extortion, finding there's some public official who won't give you a permit you're probably not entitled to. So you have private detectives who tell you, well, that guy has a mistress. And it's like, well, Navin, you can give me this permit or I'm going to give your wife these photographs. And
Please don't. And please don't give my wife those photographs.
And so Donald has been doing this his whole life. He learned this stuff from his father, who was a monster of a human being. And he had a mother who was very cold and distant. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I think it might not be unreasonable to think that she probably suffered from lengthy, multi-year postpartum depression. But she was cold and distant. So he didn't have a warm, nurturing mother. And his father was so about winning, which winning meant get the money, that there's a story that illustrates how Donald grew up. And if you were part of this story, you might have grown up to be like Donald. There's a little boy down the street who's 7, 8 years old named Johnny Messer. The Trumps lived in a nice house, but not a mansion, the kind of house a successful doctor might live in Queens, an outer borough of New York City. Suburban in its field. And Johnny's riding his bicycle down the sidewalk in front, and he passes the Trump home, and he drops a quarter at that moment. And being a little boy and, not real agile, by the time he stops, he has to turn his bike around to come back. Fred Trump, Donald's father, has pulled his Cadillac Brougham sedan, the biggest Cadillac you can buy, into the driveway. He jumps out of the car, runs to the sidewalk, picks up the quarter, holds it up in little Johnny's face and says, "It's mine now."
Oh, my God.
What kind of person does that at all, but especially to a 7-year-old boy? And Donald grew up the second son, so normally he'd be the second son, except his older brother, Fred Jr., was a sensitive soul. He eventually became a pilot for TWA, which his father thought was just beneath him. You're just a high-level bus driver. And to deal with the pressures he couldn't stand, the number one son became an alcoholic. He died in his early 40s from things related to his alcoholism. Donald saw opportunity and immediately stepped forward. And whatever dad wanted, he was there doing. And when his older brother, one day, the Trumps were very wealthy. They owned thousands of apartments built with taxpayer subsidies in the outer boroughs of New York. The older brother, one day when he was a young man, replaced a window in a Trump apartment building. And the father just absolutely threw a fit. He went nuts. You don't do that. You have that window repaired. It'll save money. It costs. He says, "Dad, the window needs to be replaced." "No, we're not replacing it. What's wrong with you?"
No.
And Donald got the message. You make Dad happy and your life will
be easy.
He also learned from his father his horrible racism. Donald believes anybody who isn't a Western or Northern European, like I am and he is illegitimate.
Oh, wow.
And he actively hates the people. He has been the subject of judicial proceedings where he has had to pay fines for removing Black, Asian women, Puerto Rican, and women from the table of his biggest gambler, a guy named Robert Labuddy, who's dead now, and whom I interviewed at great length and wrote about in my first book. And Donald learned from his father that having connections with mobsters can be very profitable. Fred Trump had a business partner named Willie Tomasello, identified in numerous law enforcement reports as a front for the Genovese and Gambino crime families, the two biggest, most vicious crime families in New York.
There were some web series also made on these things, I think.
Oh, yes. There's just an enormous abundance of evidence about all of this. And so he embraced his father's view of the world, get the money, with one difference. Fred Trump had lived in Queens, and his office was on Avenue Z in Brooklyn, which, as the name implies, is about as far away from Manhattan as you can get and still be in New York City. And it was in a dumpy, basically trailer. And Donald was just taken by the lights of Manhattan, by the glamour and whatnot. So as soon as he was given his degree by Penn, an Ivy League school, and let me be clear, he did not earn the degree. He was not an honors student. He always says, "I was the very best student." They make records of who gets honors, right?
On this question, I'd like to ask you, what has been his educational background thus far? What are his degrees?
Donald was sent the summer he turned 13 to a military academy in New York because he was such a mess up. Donald, in one of his books, brags that he slugged his second grade music teacher. I don't know if the story's true or not, but it's typical of his thinking. And he always is saying everybody else is stupid. It's I don't care who you are, you're stupid. And so he went to Fordham University, a Catholic school in Manhattan, for 2 years. This is in the Vietnam War years. Donald and I are almost the same age. I'm 2 years younger than him. And then he transferred to Penn in Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania. And he always tells people, "I went to the Wharton School, the finest business school." No, he didn't. He was an undergraduate student. Wharton had a one-professor real estate department. Donald got college credit for working on his father's apartment building projects in Cincinnati, Ohio, and elsewhere, and was rarely seen in class. I interviewed some women he asked out, and together with women I interviewed later when he had finished college, I will tell you that the most common word women who either did or didn't go out with him used to describe him was creep. Thought he was a creep. I mean, think about it. He was in his early 20s. He's tall. He wasn't overweight, blonde, handsome. You know, all 22-year-olds look good, right? Especially if you're our ages. And a lot of women didn't want to be anywhere near him because they thought he was creepy. In fact, when he got married to his first wife, because his dad told him it's time to get married, he had to go find a hard-drinking department store runway model in Montreal who claimed to be an Olympic skier. She wasn't. Because nobody put up with him. And Manhattan is a place crawling with gorgeous and smart young women looking to find some guy who's rich and going to be richer to spend their life with. He couldn't pull it off. So he's going to Penn. He doesn't show up, isn't seen very often in class, is not known for any academic distinction whatsoever. But in the words of one of his professors, he was the GDest dumb student I ever had in my life. He thought he was the smartest guy in the room, and he doesn't know anything. And that's a very good description of Donald. Donald Trump, despite having a college degree in economics, is so appallingly ignorant that he doesn't know that his tariffs are mercantilism. That was the policy under which the British took over India and China and Singapore and other places, because they believed, as did the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Germans and the French before, and the Russian, the English before that, that if you have a piece of gold, the only way for me to get richer is to take it from you. That's why we had government-sanctioned pirates. It's not about creating wealth. We're really good now at creating wealth. The human beings know how to create wealth. We're not very good at distributing the wealth, but we're really good at the other. And, Donald says all the time, everybody's stealing from us. India's stealing from us. China's stealing from us, because he spent his whole life stealing from people. So he projects this. So part one is he's proposing the economic system discredited by Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, when Adam Smith figured out market economics and published his book 249 years ago, and it's still in print. Second item, when Donald was in his first term in the spring of 2017, he went to Japan to meet with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the son of who is the grandson of a World War II war criminal, and whose own family has lots of problems. And they stopped off in Hawaii, and Trump used it to promote a building that pays him $1 million plus annual fee just to have his name on it. He doesn't own it or anything else, just to have his name on it. Interestingly, the building is not on the beach. It's a block off the beach. So much for the 3 rules of real estate: location, location, location.
Location, location.
Then after he'd made this appearance for the TV cameras, he gets in the limo and he says, "Where are we going?" "Well, we're going to Pearl Harbor for the USS Arizona Memorial." Trump doesn't know what happened in Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. His chief of staff, retired Marine General Kelly, has to explain it to him. Now, I can cite you 50 other examples, but Donald Trump doesn't know anything. And yet, he claims to be the world's greatest expert on 22 subjects, and on one of them, taxes, on which I have a worldwide reputation.
Yes,
I've lectured about taxes and tax policy on every continent but Antarctica. Donald claims to be the greatest expert in the history of the world. And here's how bald that lie is, Navin. Donald sued a former New York Times colleague of mine who wrote a book called Trump Nation. Excellent book. I told him, don't put a number on Donald's wealth. He'll sue you. Luckily, Tim O'Brien dismissed my advice. He put a number at the time, 140 to 160 million, because Donald had shown him all sorts of documents to persuade him that he was.
But so why would Donald Trump sue him if he put a number?
Because he didn't say he was a multi-billionaire. Donald was claiming he was worth billions of dollars, and And Tim
It was
showed
an
you where-
it was an image thing,
That's right. That's right. And 140 to 160 million is enough to live a great life, have a private jet, all sorts of things, but you're not a billionaire.
Yeah.
And it's funny, he sued Tim. Under oath, Tim's excellent lawyers asked Donald, so, Mr. Trump, what do you know about accounting? I don't know anything about accounting. You don't know anything about accounting? No, I leave that to the bean counters. And they spent pages of the transcript tying this down. So there's no way Trump could possibly ever escape. I misunderstood. I misspoke. I mean, they just bolted him to the floor. Well, you cannot know tax without knowing accounting. I had to learn enough accounting that I eventually got an appointment as a professor in the Graduate School of Business. They called me a distinguished visiting lecturer in the Graduate Business School at Syracuse University after I left the New York Times. You can't know tax if you don't know accounting, and yet he claims to be the greatest expert in the history of the world. Donald tells lies that are so outrageous. Either people go, yeah, it's just a lie, and then they dismiss that without thinking about its significance, or, oh, wow, you must be really smart.
Got it. David K., you brought out the topic on tariffs. Now, there's a very internationally renowned poet in India, in Hindi, the language that I speak, Sanjay Jhala, when he knew that I was going to be speaking with you. So he asked me to ask you a very, very special question.
Sure.
This is Sanjay Jhala's question, that trade into tariffs, trade multiplied by tariff multiplied by Trump, does it equal to economic terrorism?
I wouldn't go so far as to say terrorism, but it's going to make the world, the whole world as a whole, not every country, but the whole world worse off. A tariff is a protectionist measure that benefits a growing economy, an undeveloped economy. And a tariff is in fact the equivalent of a national retail sales tax on selected items. America had tariffs in the beginning. We didn't have an income tax. When the early days of the American Republic, tariffs were the biggest source of revenue. Why? Well, we want to have a domestic oven making industry. The British make ovens. The Germans make ovens. We don't have their experience in manufacturing. We don't have their capital. So you put a tariff on these, and that allows the domestic manufacturer, which is essentially youthful and inexperienced and short on capital, to raise prices to almost the level of the tariffed good. And let me use automobiles as an example. Imagine that you own Navin Motors and you sell cars out the door wholesale for $10,000. I own David K. Motors and I sell the competing car out the door for $10,000 to wholesale to the dealers. Donald Trump puts on your Canadian or Indian made car a 60% tariff. So your car out the door now, you're going to have to get $16,000.
$16,000.
Well, I'm not going to, and you were making $1,000 a car profit, and so was I. Okay, on 10,000, reasonable number. I'm not going to continue selling cars for $10,000 and $1,000 profit. I'm going to raise the price of my cars to $15,000. So I'm going to take market share away from you, because some people are going to say, well, a Navin car is $1,000 more. I don't think it's worth an extra $1,000. A Johnston car, a David K car may not be quite as good. For $1,000, I'll buy his car. If I can sell as many cars as I was selling before, I now make $6,000 profit per car, not $1,000. But even if my sales fall by half, first of all, my costs fall. I don't have to pay over many hours of labor. I don't have to buy as much steel. And I'll make $3,000 per car against the same base. So it is a system to subsidize domestic manufacturers. And what the news media in America generally has missed, I've been on the warpath about this. I finally gotten a few places, a few times to mention this, is the real issue with the tariff for Americans is not the effort to suppress imports from India or China or somewhere else. It is the allowing of the ownership class in America to raise prices to earn what economists call supranormal profits. And it is essentially a system to redistribute money from the mass of Americans to the narrow class of people who own and control manufacturing enterprises.
This has been a master class for students of journalism all over the world once they are hearing you. Just
I hope.
another, yes, I hope too, and I'm sure it would be with David K on our show. David K, I'd like to ask you that 25, 30 years adding to this tariff thing, 25, this is the economic parts the pundits can the pundits can keep discussing all the micro, macro parts, whatever in economics. But tell me, there's something called trust, friendship, and sentiment, where the US-India relationship was built on a steadfast foundation of 25, 30 years of trust. This tariff business and speaking so loudly and trying with these threatening demeanors all over the media, has it not spoilt President Donald Trump's relationship with Prime Minister Modi and sent out a wrong signal to the people of India?
I was actually surprised that Trump put the 50% tariff on because of India buying deeply discounted oil from Russia, which is a benefit to the economy of India, and ignoring the fact that the biggest supplier of refined diesel fuel to Ukraine is India. And the way Trump went at this, I was very surprised. Now, it's important to note that his tariffs exclude pharmaceuticals. Almost all the generic pharmaceuticals, the drugs I'm on as an old guy, are made in India.
Made in India. That's why I said
they're not subject to the tariff. But and there were other ways to go at this to address this matter.
But how is he? It seems that the relationship, that India is never going to be trusting America again.
Right. So, to the extent that Modi, who has proven to be an incredibly agile and disciplined political leader, whether you like his views or not, I mean, you got to admire that this guy knows what he's doing.
Correct.
He thought he had some relationship with Donald, and what he didn't understand is that no one has a relationship with Donald. Donald believes he's special. He really does believe this. He believes, I've been saying for at least 14 years, Donald believes he should be the dictator of the whole world. The whole world should run under his thumb because no one else is competent to do so. He always says all these other people aren't competent to be president, and I was mocked for that back in 2011. Well, what did Trump say earlier this year to the Atlantic magazine? I run America and the whole world. And that's in his head what he does. And so in the long run, the imposition of these tariffs are going to, I believe, have a horrible effect for America, but maybe the rest of the world will be better off. The nightmare scenario I foresee is that the European Union, the UK, which, remember, famously and stupidly quit the EU, Canada, Japan, third largest economy in the world, South Korea, Vietnam, Australia, New Zealand, India, and maybe China, or maybe with privileges China, sort of a partial membership, can get together and create a new trading zone, ignoring the United States. And if they do that, the U.S.'s significance in the world falls greatly. Now, combine this with the second very important effect. The most highly educated people in America, when they're examined through their religious beliefs, are Hindu. The next most highly educated group are Ashkenazi Jews. Most people think it's Ashkenazi Jews. It's not anymore, but they're reasonably close. The next group, way below, are one of the mainstream Protestant religions, Episcopalians, Lutherans, one of those. And when you get down to Baptists, you just don't have well-educated people.
That's a lesson in history now.
Yes.
And religion.
And so where I live in Rochester, New York, we have more than 1,000 families registered at the Hindu temple. We have scientists, businessmen, engineers, chemists, and lots of physicians. Surprise, surprise. That scares racists like Donald Trump and his followers. And they don't want to think anybody with brown skin or black skin is smarter than they are. They might acknowledge this individual, but they certainly don't want to think there's lots of people like that. And they don't want to do the disciplined work, by the way, to get well educated and have a rigorous brain that they work from. So the effort to prevent more students from coming from India. And China and South Korea to American universities, where they generally pay full freight. They don't get discounted tuition. They pay full tuition. One of my daughters went to law school in Toronto, at the University of Toronto. I had to pay 100 cents on the Canadian dollar for it. That intellectual firepower brought to America, especially by parts of the Indian diaspora, is going to go away. It's not going to benefit the U.S. There are already scientists, and this goes back 15, 20 years, who have left the U.S. to go to India or China because of the restrictions the George W. Bush administration put on experiments with stem cells from aborted fetuses, failed pregnancy. And by the way, somewhere between 1 in 6 and 1 in 4 pregnancies, depending on how you want to measure it, fails. This is a very common thing. So if, for example, more and more people, as India becomes wealthier and moves back towards where it and China were in 1500, the two wealthiest nations in the world, by shunning people from India, oh my goodness, are we going to get left behind? And physics, chemistry, math,
biology,
genetics, those are the areas where students from India who come here are doing unbelievably well.
Actual sciences.
Yes, and the more, Navin, more than half the increase in American economic output, the GDP, since 1948, the year I was born, more than half can be traced directly to taxpayer investments in basic science. Companies generally only do applied science. So companies would never figure out how to get the system, the GSP system that allows you to look at your cell phone and say, hey, Siri, take me to this address and get the directions. That underlying capacity, the math, the physics, the software, that's basic science. The application on your phone is applied science. And once government pulls back on basic science, applied science falls. And as you know, India is going to get richer over time. I mean, it's got terrible problems and terrible poverty and a really screwed up legal system that is arguably the biggest thing holding back India's economic growth. It has a huge advantage over China in that there is not this is the way you will think. This party has spoken. That's no matter how rigorous Chinese education is, until they drop that, and they are experimenting, by the way, with Western style education. I've had law students who, business students rather, not law students, business students who were part of the experiment the party's been doing with Western style education. But China and India are going to get wealthier over time. They're going to have less interest in the U.S. and may eventually not need it at all. And of course, China will do its very best to make sure that it's on top and China's second and India's second.
Got it. Great. David K., I need to ask you this from your perspective. When Operation Sindoor was taking place, the military operations which India conducted against the terrorists and the state of Pakistan.
Yeah, this is the recent skirmishes in the
Kashmir.
Not Wayland Valley. Did I say that right? Yeah, we're talking about Kashmir.
Yes, the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So Pakistan has a history of allegedly pushing in terrorism into India. So why did Donald Trump choose to call General Asim Munir to the White House for a lunch or dinner or whatever? And what is this bonhomie suddenly that Donald Trump developed with the chief of the army of Pakistan when they were the perpetrators of this heinous crime that took place in India?
Well, this goes to Donald doesn't know anything. All right. Remember when 9/11 happened, Donald claimed that there were Muslims in New Jersey jumping up and down and cheering. Absolutely just a lie. He claimed that all sorts of his friends died in the collapse of the towers. He can go to a single funeral and nobody's identified anybody was his friend. He just makes stuff up. Donald creates his own reality. So India, the U.S. has, throughout the Cold War, the U.S. was very vexed about India's warmth to the Soviet. When Bill Clinton came in 1993, he started a determined effort to wean India away from the influence of the Kremlin and make it not a neutral country, but an American ally. And subsequent administrations pursued this policy of we need to be friends with India, the biggest democracy in the world. Donald Trump comes along. He doesn't believe in democracy. He sees himself as a dictator. He has no idea of the history. It wouldn't dawn on him that by inviting the head of the military of Pakistan, which hid Osama bin Laden and protected him
in Abbottabad,
in their what is essentially their main military
cantonment.
Yeah. It would be like, what? Donald doesn't know anything, and if Donald does not take his daily presidential brief on most days, and when he does get it, they dumb it down. I mean, they're very clear testimony about this. They make it very simple because he doesn't understand things. I would contrast that with Barack Obama, who he keeps calling stupid. Barack Obama would get a 2-page memo. There was a White House idea.
A dossier.
That the president has to read so much, make sure your memo is no more than 2 single-space pages. And he would literally pick up the phone and call John Holdren, his science advisor, who told me this story, and say, hey, it looks like I need about 16 pages on this. Get it to me, will you, right away? I need to know more. Barack Obama, the first day he was in law school, was identified by professors as a man with an elegant mind. And in fact, as a first-year law student, when you're a nobody, that's like being a grunt at basic training in the Army. And about 20% of law students wash out, by the way.
Yeah.
He got his name on his professor's next law review article. That Fantastic. Just doesn't happen. So Barack Obama, when he became president, what did he do? He went to the Situation Room in the White House and he said, we're going to get Osama bin Laden, start figuring out how. Because George W. Bush, recall when he failed at that, because he likewise didn't have any knowledge of the world. He was a nice guy. You'd love to go have dinner with him. But he said, I don't care if we catch him anymore. And, eventually Barack Obama got him. And they said we tried to capture him. That's ridiculous. If he'd been captured, there would have been hostage takings all over the world.
So do you really think this lunch dinner, which President Trump extended to Asim Munir, the chief of army staff of Pakistan, is it going to be of any help to the United States of America?
No, but the reason Donald would do something like that would be to thumb his nose at Modi, to say, well, you didn't do what I wanted, watch this. And, India does 50 times the trade with the U.S. that Pakistan does. Pakistan, one of its biggest exports to the U.S. are soccer balls, which are sewn by children, child labor, which should make them illegal, by the way, in the United States.
Yep.
Cares about that. Pakistan, is unfortunately the legacy of how the British walked out of India, and Gandhi did get them to walk out. They didn't have to be shot at. Was creating, Pakistan and 2 sides, now separate countries, and leaving behind one of the things Gandhi warned about, which is corrupt leaders. And while India is not immune from problems with corruption at the top, compared to Pakistan, that's a whole another universe. But Donald doesn't know any of that. If you went to Donald Trump and said, tell me what happened with General Dyer at Amritsar.
Oh, the Jallianwala Bagh. Yeah.
Is that an airline? General, what's Amritsar? Is that an airline? I mean, that's how ignorant the man is. And, one of the things I often say about Donald in the Middle East is I don't expect most Americans to know the difference between a Sunni and a Shia and the reasons that it matters. But if you're the president of the United States and you don't know that, they can put all of our lives in danger.
Correct.
And Donald has no idea. And if you said, by the way, within the Sunni side of this, tell me about what Wahhabism is, he'd go, well, is that a sandwich?
Come on, David. No, that's a bit too much. All right. So, okay, don't you think West, in particular the United States of America, has let Ukraine down?
Yes.
This is something which I've been thinking about for such a long time because I was hearing some of Donald Trump's speeches before he became the president during the campaign, and he said, "If I was there, this war may not have ever
Would not
happened."
have happened. Would not have happened.
Yeah, yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, why? And then Vladimir Putin coming to Alaska. So, just club this for us and make us understand how does this
So,
work? I mean, why has the West let Ukraine down?
yeah, well, first of all, it's important to understand that Vladimir Putin, the modern czar, has been clear on the record since about 1998 that the worst thing that happened in the world, in his opinion, in the 20th century wasn't the Holocaust, it wasn't the nuclear bombs in Japan, it was the breakup of the old Soviet Union with its satellites now being mostly free. He's recaptured Chechnya and Georgia. And that he wants to take on the rest of the former satellite countries.
The USSR, as they called it.
Yes, exactly. I mean, he's not a communist, but then on the other hand, the people who ran Moscow weren't really communists; they were just authoritarian. So when in the fall of 21, President Joe Biden made public basic intelligence material that normally the public would never see, and which to most people would just go over their head. But there were lots of news stories. The Russians are going to invade Ukraine. He made a major policy mistake. He, having a deep experience in diplomacy as the longtime head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he took an incremental approach to each step taken by Putin. I believe what he should have said was, you set one foot inside Ukraine, and you will not face American soldiers, but you will face every modern weapon, every
weapon ever,
device, you name it. And he would have announced that right now we have in the air on their way to the United States, Ukrainian pilots who are going to train on our best jet fighters, bombers, and other aircraft. And had he done that, I think Putin might well not have crossed the border in February of 22. But all the way along, this belief presented to Biden by his advisors that we want to be careful we don't provoke World War II. I think World War III, I think was just a terrible policy mistake. There's plenty of history in the world, the most famous example being the British and the Nazis over the Sudetenland, the Czechoslovakia, that incrementalism with a determined dictatorial expansionist like Hitler or Putin just doesn't work. The same thing with China. Xi wants to build greater China. So he's built artificial islands in the near the Spratly Islands. Yes, they made promises that Hong Kong would remain free. Yeah, right. That lasted years. And they want to control Tibet. And they're going to continue to the degree they find it in their interest to harass India on the border. The Galwan Valley is not going to be the last skirmish between the two. The other things China wants to try and be ahead of India, those are economic and diplomatic matters. And, India should be smart enough to figure out how to cope with those. And does it matter that much if you're one or two? Would be a big political decision for India because China absolutely wants to be number one. So understand that the core of all of this about Ukraine, Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize. He's furious that he doesn't have it. He keeps saying he wants to have it, even though he's now calls the Department of Defense the Department of War. He just murdered, and I mean that word intentionally.
You stole my question. You stole my question. I was about to ask you about the Nobel Prize.
As someone who teaches law and teaches criminal justice and has written about law enforcement, I was the first reporter to seriously expose the LAPD for what we all know it is today.
Yes.
That was almost a half century ago. Donald Trump thinks he should get the Nobel Peace Prize, but he's a warmonger. And he's a coward. He got deferment, so he didn't have to go to the war in Vietnam. in case anybody's wondering, I'm the son of a 100% disabled veteran of World War II, which means I didn't go near the top of the draft list. By the time I would have been drafted, I had 3 of my 8 children, and they weren't drafting fathers. I didn't, ever ask for a deferment or anything else. Those were just the rules. So I did not serve. My brother served, as my father did to his horrible outcome. So Donald, think about how empty as a person you have to be that you're president of the United States for the second time, and you feel incomplete because a bunch of guys in Norway, a country he doesn't care about, didn't give you an award. I mean, it screams about what a petty little child Donald is. And that's what he is. He's a 13-year-old boy. He talks and thinks about women like 13-year-old boys with this mixture of fear and mystery. And he has no emotional maturity. He goes off the handle over things that, would run off the back of a normal person. And indeed, what was one of the criticisms of Barack Obama? That he was so cool, so comfortable that, horrible things would be said. And he just, like a water off the back of a duck. Yeah.
Yeah. So David K., coming back to a few questions which are very intriguing is, did Donald Trump get to be friends with Elon Musk? And why did the friendship or the bonhomie not last? What made them come together and what made them fall apart?
Donald doesn't have friends. He's not capable of that. This is a man who has never known a moment of love in his life. His relationships with his own family are transactional. His 3 marriages are commercial marriages. And some people listening may have a hard time understanding this, but most of us hope to have the romantic ideal that my wife and I have after almost 45 years. But there are lots of marriages that are just business transactions between husband and wife. And Melania, didn't even live in the White House during the first term and often wasn't around. Go back to your basic question.
My basic question was, how did Elon Musk and Donald Trump get together and then fall? They had a falling.
So Elon Musk,
the root cause.
Elon Musk, who is this prince of South African apartheid, who got lucky with a couple of early investments that made him very rich. He didn't invent Tesla. He got control of it. He didn't invent the other companies that he's involved with. He wanted things from the government that he wasn't getting. And he realized if he would put up $250 million or a similarly large sum to help Trump get in, and the U.S. Supreme Court had taken away all the rules that limited how much money you can put into a campaign, that he could get favors that he wanted from the government. A lot of Elon Musk's wealth derives from government contracts, and he was under investigation by inspectors general, whose job is to root out inefficiency, waste, fraud, and corruption. Donald gets to the White House. He immediately removes the inspectors general who are investigating Musk. He grants Musk these extraordinary powers to seize data about individual Americans, their finances, their address, their work history. He gives Musk basically everything he asks for, and then it comes apart. And it comes apart in part because Donald went after electric vehicles and Teslas, which, by the way, are getting really old in the tooth now. They look the same on the outside now. They came out of the market in the late 90s because he hasn't reinvested in the business. Donald immediately pushed away because with Donald, all relationships are transactional. They are one way. They are absolutely one-way relationships. And the only way you stay in Donald's good graces is, how deeply do you want me to bend, sir, when you bend the knee? That's the whole thing. I mean, we've seen the videos of the cabinet meetings where they go around the room and say, "Oh, you're the greatest president of all time." I mean, it's like watching a North Korean cabinet meeting with not even the translation. It's pathetic.
So tell me, how does the White House staff deal with the person the way you are portraying Donald Trump to be? How does the staff deal with the president like that? The chief of staff, his secretaries, his the defense secretary or the home secretary, whatever you call them, the secretary of state.
So the first time around, Donald did not expect to become president. Let's be very clear. He himself has said that. And so normally when you're running in a campaign, you prepare. There are about 4,000 positions you get to appoint in the federal government, of which about half of those are important policy positions. And so you would have a whole team of people collecting names, vetting people. So David Kay, would you like to be the Internal Revenue Service Commissioner? They'll call you on the phone. Actually, what they'd say is, who would you recommend for that job? Really trying to suss out if I would want the job. And I was, by the way, actually called about that and immediately realized this was in the George W. Bush administration. It was an effort to compromise me as a New York Times reporter, and I just shut it down immediately. They did it to another reporter with a different government agency, and he did the same thing, just shut it down. Donald had no preparation. When the family went to the White House for the first time, they walked through the West Wing where there are all these little cubicles and tiny offices and people were in very tight space. And Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, said to whoever was guiding them, well, how many of these people do we get to keep for our administration? Well, none of them. Political appointees, you have to fill every desk. And so they had to rely on other people. And in the first administration, they were blocked all over the place. The White House counsel, a stalwart Republican, would go into the Oval Office and say, Mr. President, I'm sorry, you can't do this. It's not legal. It will not happen. His chief of staff, John Kelly, until he fired him, would say, you can't do this, Mr. President, or this will damage your presidency. And he as a general, and you don't get to be a general officer in the U.S. military unless you're very good. You may be a jerk of a human being, but you are very good.
Good at your job.
Military issues. Would tell him you can't do this. That's not what's going on in this administration. The Heritage Foundation, a huge promoter of hatred, racism, oppressing women, they wrote Project 2025. When it was announced, Donald went and blessed it. And then throughout the campaign said, I have no idea what you're talking about. Well, they're implementing it now. And they're implementing it with people from the Heritage Foundation, including people who have, Nazi imagery dominating their offices at the Heritage Foundation. And yes, Mr. President, you want that? Sure. That's what we're going to do. Oh, you want us to kill those 11 Venezuelans? Sure. Happy to do it. Without thinking, if Donald Trump is out of office, and you participated in this, you may well be prosecuted. And let me one more point, Navin, about this. In the American system, grunts, sailors, airmen take an oath to follow the orders of the president and defend the Constitution. Correct. Officers, like all civilian officers, people who run agencies, even if they're the 14th deputy secretary, they only take an oath to uphold the Constitution.
The Constitution.
That is a central tenet in having a politically uninvolved military. Trump is trying to change that. He's trying to place only loyalists at the top. If he totally replaces people, and he hasn't done it as quickly as I thought he would do, but he has been removing people, that's a key thing to becoming a full-blown dictator we can't do anything about.
So how would you sum it up, his relationship with his staff and his staff's relationship with him?
Do what I said or walk out the door. It's as simple as that. And he doesn't have to articulate that. Everybody knows that. And the people around him are, by and large, grossly incompetent. Kash Patel is FBI director. I mean, that would be like making me president of the United States. It's absurd. And these are unqualified people. Many of them are deeply morally compromised people. But they now have power and influence and fame and the opportunity when they leave, unless things turn against them, to make a lot of money after you leave government. It's not uncommon for people who are senior officials in government to walk out the door and get corporate directorships, start businesses where people will do business with you, and that's been the system. So people who are weak, people who are not prepared to do what they're supposed to do. We have all sorts of people who are qualified to be Secretary of Defense, and we get a 2-bit Army captain named Pete Hegseth who brags he hasn't washed his hands in more than 10 years. It's a terrible terrible damage. And the damage Donald Trump is doing to the U.S. government, which was the subject of my second book in my Trump trilogy. There was first The Making of Donald Trump, the biography that talked about his history of working, being partners with one of the biggest drug traffickers in America and children gambling in his casinos and all sorts of crimes. Then I did It's Even Worse Than You Think, which was the effort Trump was making to tear down the federal government. He didn't do very well at it. He did some, but not real well in the first term. Now he's being greatly successful. And then the third one, how he got richer off the government.
So
and Donald is now finally an actual billionaire because of the extortion racket called the Trump White House.
Agreed. So why do the people of the United States of America keep voting him in? Why did they vote him in for the second time?
Well, only a minority of Americans voted him in. Let's be clear about that. Okay.
Okay.
Since George Washington ran for president in the first election, the biggest outcome in every presidential election has been the same. Didn't bother to vote. And Donald Trump barely got in. He won by 1.5 percentage points, a little under 1.5 percentage points, one of the narrowest margins in American history. He says he got a mandate. Well, Ronald Reagan in his second term got a mandate. Lyndon Baines Johnson in his one elected term absolutely got a mandate. Donald Trump, he didn't get a mandate. The reason Donald has done well was the subject of my 3 economics books, my economics trilogy, which, by the way, 5 people have run for president citing those books that I wrote. In 2016, when Trump first lost the popular vote, but won the Electoral College, 90% of Americans were worse off than in 1973. Basically, they only got paid till Thanksgiving, the last Thursday of November, and had to go without income for the rest of the year compared to 73. And if you count the changes in how fringe benefits like healthcare and retirement are financed, they actually only got paid through the Halloween, the last day of October, and they had to go 2 months with no income. Had we kept the distribution of income in this country in 1973, in 2018, the bottom 90% of Americans would have had 67% more income. So if you made 100,000, you would have made 167,000, and Trump wouldn't be doing well. So what did Trump do? He went around saying, your economics are terrible. The Democrats did this to you. It's actually the Republicans by and large. And I alone can save you. That his policies were completely contrary to the interests of the bottom 90%. These aren't people, by and large, who go to university, who sit around as I do, researching all the time. These are bus drivers, like one of my sons, or waitresses, office workers, manual laborers, like my late brother. They don't think about policy, and they wouldn't know how to understand it. What they know is my economics are bad. They're getting worse. I'm not as well off as dad or granddad. And this man says
the groceries are getting costlier.
Groceries are costing more money. And this man comes along and says, if you vote for the other person, it's going to be worse. If you vote for me, I'm going to fix it all. The price of groceries is going to go down the day I get elected. The war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine, just need one day. I don't even need to be in the White House. I just need to win the election. And gullible people bought this. Never underestimate the gullibility of a not particularly highly educated population. And it's significant that Donald Trump's support is quite weak among people who have college degrees and especially postgraduate degrees.
Excellent. David K., I would like to ask you that there was a very, very good relationship between the United States of America and Canada for hundreds of years. And suddenly Donald Trump... I don't know
about that. They invaded us in 1812.
Yes, but I mean, it can't be like, say, North Korea or South Korea.
Really for more than
yes. So, but he keeps talking about Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States of America. That has significantly strained ties between the Canadian government and the government of the United States of America. What's your take on that?
Well, this goes to Donald's utter ignorance. It goes to his failure to have any respect for anyone else. A key component of Trumpism is a lack of regard. Wokeism, woke is really good manners, in my view, and having regard for people who don't like you. Rochester Institute of Technology, because it has the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, Everybody is very, very aware of people who aren't like you and treat people with respect. It doesn't matter if you're beautiful or ugly, fat or thin, whatever your skin color, nobody cares. Everybody treats everybody with respect. And I wish the whole country were like that. But Donald also doesn't understand Canada. I mean, he said, oh, they're minor trading partner. Canada is the US's biggest trading partner. He doesn't understand that if you buy a car supposedly built in Michigan from Ford, that parts in it cross the border between Canada and the US as many as a dozen times. You know, there's someone makes this component, and then you send it to the Toronto Ford Works, which are enormous if you drive in from Rochester, New York, where I live. And they do some processing to it, and then they ship it to somebody in Ohio, and then they ship it. I mean, you would think that all that transport is inefficient, but in fact, very cheap to move things. And he doesn't know that. He doesn't understand that. He doesn't understand that when you put tariffs on steel and aluminum, those are inputs to making things from washing machines to cars. And well, steel in 1959, 58 or 59, we had a steel strike in Pennsylvania, and my parents' business in California failed. Steel is much less important today. We're a service economy. We're a cyber economy. Nonetheless, putting tariffs on those two fundamental products, they mess up all sorts of businesses. People who make tubes for cigars, you know, aluminum tubes, they all are messed up by this. He doesn't know anything. And he believes in his heart that might makes right. That's why he admires dictators Kim and Xi and Putin and MBS in Saudi Arabia, because he thinks we're special, and he believes he's the most special. And were Trump to totally set himself up as Donald Emperor One, which may well happen. We may not get out of it. I think we will. I hope we will, but we might not. These other dictators are going to discover that Donald will say, you know what? Well, that oil in Saudi Arabia, we should make it the 52nd state.
Got it.
Venezuela, all that oil, let's make them the 53rd state. So the dictators in the rest of the world should be worried, because like Adolf Hitler, whose craziness led to the defeat of the Nazis, attacking the Russians, who bore a much heavier burden than Americans and Brits in World War II. And, you know, not understanding logistics and how to build the right military equipment you needed to pursue the war, not even trucks. You know, building 1,400 models of trucks without interchangeable parts. Was a terrible problem for the Germans, the Nazis, because they didn't know what they were doing. And that's what Donald's like, Navin. He doesn't know anything. So the one good lesson from the 7 most notable fascist dictatorships, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Germany, is that fascist governments appoint cronies, family members, and other incompetents. Things don't work. The trains never ran on time under Mussolini. And eventually the inability to provide the services from government, the products from government that allow an economy to work, will bring about the end of a fascist regime. I mean, it lasted longest with Salazar in Portugal and the guy in Spain, Franco. But they fail. And remember what Gandhi taught: all tyrants fall. Donald Trump is a tyrant. The problem is, by the time he falls, he can have burned down the United States of America as a country of free people who are, imperfectly for sure, leading the world to a better state for more and more people.
I couldn't have asked for a better masterclass ever, David K. Thanks. But I'm going to sum it up with a short 3 or 4 questions. Then we're going to sum it up. It's been brilliant. Thank you very much. What do you think? How do you think the relationship between the United States of America vis-a-vis Israel and the Palestine conflict is going to sum up in a very short few lines?
Benjamin Netanyahu, you can see videos of him back to when all of his hair was black, hates Palestinians. He had a brother who died in a military operation. He hates Muslims. He hates Arabs. And he is himself incredibly corrupt. He's on trial, on hiatus at the moment, but he was having to spend 6 hours a day in the dock while being tried. And he has always wanted the opportunity to eliminate Palestinians. And Joe Biden never really pushed back on him. And so what he's doing is making Israel a pariah state, like South Africa was in the last couple of years of apartheid. The U.S. could shut him off easily. We give more foreign aid per capita by far to Israel than anywhere else. We can withdraw military aid. We could get all the food that's needed and medicines for people who are there if we wanted to. But we have an idiot in the White House. And before that, we had Biden, who just couldn't bring himself to push back because he was afraid he'd be called anti-Semitic. Criticizing Netanyahu and his government is not anti-Semitism. I live by choice in a town of 38,000 people that is probably the most densely Jewish populated in America. We have 6 synagogues and the parking lot of the 7th. And almost all my neighbors are Jewish. And I deliberately chose this neighborhood because I knew I'd have neighbors who are educated and smart. A bunch of my other neighbors are a part of the Indian diaspora. And a few Muslims, not many, a few.
So what's the solution? What's the solution?
Yeah, well, the solution in the long run is the Palestinians need to have their own land. And none of the surrounding Arab countries want to take the Palestinians. I don't have an interest in them. Every Palestinian I know, and that's probably not a fully selected group. They tend to be educated journalists, former government officials, doctors. Boy, they're incredibly sophisticated thinkers. They have very, very subtle minds. But the solution has to be 2 states, and it has to be a resolution of what, as a non-believer, in my view, is an incredibly stupid thing. This is a holy place. I'm sorry, I don't buy that. I appreciate other people are willing to die for that, but let's figure out a way to get along with one another and stop hating one another.
That's a beautiful line which you said. Let's figure out a way.
Yeah.
These days, people don't want to figure out a way.
No, and Netanyahu in particular, so long as he keeps the war in Gaza going, remains in power and is at no risk of going to prison. So he has a second motivation, just as Donald did to get back to the White House, because he would have surely been convicted on the 2 federal charges against him and would have gotten prison time for those, because everybody who commits 1/10 of what he did in the documents case, they get at least, a brief jail term.
And connected to this issue quickly, what about Iran?
Well, Iran is the most sophisticated country in the Middle East, right? It's the Persian culture that gave us algebra and a lot of astronomy and mathematics. And it is the natural leader in the Middle East, not the 1926 warlord government put together in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula by the first Saud. And so, we managed in 1954 when Mossadegh was elected popularly to be the leader of Iran. The Red Scare post World War II intelligence establishment was terrified that the reforms Mossadegh promised were going to produce a communist country, which I think is ridiculous, but that's what they believed. So we overthrew him and we put in the Shah. And when I was a boy, I remember here in America talking with young college students from Iran who'd been in the military who would tell me these stories about being on the front with Russia, where they were impressed into the military, and at least one of them claiming that he had, with a piano wire and handles, garroted a Russian soldier and got rewarded for that. We drove the Iranians away from us by supporting the Shah. And when the revolution came, we completely mishandled the revolution. And Iran doesn't trust us. And lo and behold, because it's a Shia-dominated society, the Sunni governments, going back to my point about Donald earlier, are around them.
Yep.
They're terrified of the Iranians. And they know the Iranians are way ahead of them in thoughtfulness, diplomacy, philosophy, you name a subject. Somehow we have to find a way to get a rapprochement with the government in Iran. I'll be long dead before we fix our relationship, but our natural ally is Tehran, not Riyadh.
Got it. The last two questions is one that, do you think it's correct to say, as my friend Sanjay Jhala and I always keep discussing, that um, journalism, journalistic articles, and pieces of things that are written are hardly worth reading these days? It's all cut, copy, paste from Google, which journalism, which I have been, seeing, with all due respect to all other journalists. And literature is hardly read. Students hardly read books these days. So, as a Pulitzer Prize winner, as a distinguished journalist, what's your take on this?
Well, there's two parts to this. Let me deal with the hardly reading stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, young people are reading more than ever, the research shows. They're just reading short snippets, little things on Facebook and Instagram. They're not reading novels. We know that that's the case. I know from having reported on this that there are high school teachers across America who, instead of having students read To Kill a Mockingbird, which is banned in many schools in America, they show the movie. Well, if you and I read To Kill a Mockingbird, we each have in our head our own vision of Atticus Finch. But if we see the movie, we get Gregory Peck's pre-digested, brilliant, but pre-digested Atticus Finch. The purpose of reading novels when you're young is to understand the other, or as the sociologists would say, capital T, capital O, the other. And we're losing that. And we're not having young people read novels, and they should. And they don't generally go to movies, which are another way young people can learn about life, romance, money, all sorts of things.
Storytelling.
Storytelling. They play video games. That's the big thing they do. And there's narrative in video games, but I don't think they teach you the skills for life.
And part two?
So it's easy to exploit people who don't have any deep knowledge of this. So part two about journalism. I'm a well-known press critic, Navin. I am the only journalist in America who caused an entire broadcast chain to have to shut down and go out of business because I showed they were putting on what today we would call fake news. I've written press criticism my whole career for the Columbia Journalism Review and elsewhere. So there are a lot of journalists who don't like me because of that. But I'm not a product of journalism school. I was a front page staff writer at one of the biggest newspapers in America when I was only 19 years old. I'm self-taught. Most journalism is an accurate recounting of the official version of events. If the Canadian Prime Minister said X, if General Electric announced the following earnings in the last year, if your mayor said we're going to increase spending on the city parks, you can count on those stories. They are accurate, and they will accurately quote the critics or the others around about that. The problem is that a lot of that reporting, there's no understanding of what's going on beneath the surface. A great deal of journalism is very superficial. I read stories, for example, in the Wall Street Journal, an excellent newspaper, all the time, where I say, well, that's a very good readable story. I learned some new facts, and the writer of this story doesn't have a clue about the underlying issues. Most journalists do not operate at the level of principle and theory. They operate at the level of mechanics. And in my sideline teaching career until a year ago when I became a full-time professor, I've always pushed that on my students. Learn at the level of principle and theory. Your career will advance. You'll understand the world. You'll run right past people who have a mechanical understanding. Journalists are by and large mechanical.
Does advertising and sponsorship?
No, not in no legitimate newsroom does advertising have any influence. And I'll give you a story about that.
I'm speaking about advertising and sponsor budgets.
Yeah. How much advertising you have determines how much money the newsroom can have. But if an advertiser walked into the newsroom of the LA Times or the New York Times, the Washington Post, or the advertising people walked in, we'd all be out on the curb. We're not going to put up with that crap. The publisher of the New York Times often comes to the 5 o'clock news meetings first half, where the editors of the sports and business and metro and national sections propose what stories they'd like to have on the front page. But when the pitch session ends, the publisher leaves along with the people who pitched. So he doesn't know what decisions will be made by the people who decide what gets on the front page and where. He doesn't have any influence over that. And in fact,
that's transparency.
Well, and it's also proper ethical standards.
Yeah, proprietary.
We had a scandal at the Los Angeles Times where there was a revenue sharing agreement with an advertiser. It led to the departure of the CEO, of his top lieutenants, of everybody at the top of the newspaper. And the paper ran I think it was 48,000 word self-investigation, edited by retired editors who were no longer at the paper. In fact, every time we've had a big scandal, the Philadelphia Inquirer's top political reporter being the mistress of the Democratic Party boss in South Philadelphia, the reporter Jason Blair at the New York Times, who just made stuff up, it led to both huge page one disclosures by the newspaper and the firing of the top editors. And by the way, there's an old saying. I once paid a researcher to find out who started this, because I knew it as a young man. For spending all that money, the first written example the researcher could find was by me. So I know they didn't get to the bottom of it. But the saying is, doctors bury their mistakes. Lawyers see theirs off to jail. Only journalists sign theirs on the front page for everyone to read. So you should pay attention to the news, but be skeptical. It's the first rough draft of history. I have written the lead story for the New York Times, the LA Times, and other papers where on something happened, like a big plane crash. And from the moment I became aware of it until I had to turn over my copy, I had less than an hour. You're not going to get a complete comprehensive account in that period of time. The big heavyweight investigations that are being done by the New York Times and the LA Times and Bloomberg to this day, those are really thoroughly, carefully done. This is my business for 40 years to do investigative reporting before I moved to opinion writing and books. So no, pay attention to the news and support news organizations, and don't hesitate to criticize them. Write letters to the editor. Here's the key trick about writing a letter to the editor. You got to write it right away. Can't wait, fulminate about it for a couple of days. Keep it to 100 to 150 words. And if you can do it in 75 words, your chance of getting published is better. Just what's your point? And don't start off with a throat clearing, I was reading your story and I sputtered in my coffee. No, what's the point? Your story yesterday left out this incredibly important fact. So, but read the news, but always read it with a grain of salt. Including my coverage.
David K., we hopefully will have you on many more shows with some other guests with us in the near future, with your consent. Just before I let you go, and thank you very much for coming on our show, kyonghantibajee. By the way, kyonghantibajee, if I translate it in English for you, means why did the bell ring?
Okay.
So if somebody rings, thank you. If somebody rings the bell in your house, so you'd wonder, why did the bell ring and who came in?
Right.
So if Donald Trump, the last question is that if Donald Trump picks up the phone today and calls you and asks you for some advice, what would it be? What would you tell Donald Trump?
You need to resign, and you need to, and you need to make sure that your vice president resigns first, because he's as unqualified as you are. And Donald called me at home many, many times. Usually to threaten to sue me because he doesn't have the stamina and the moral courage to say it to my face. And I always say to him, look, Donald, if you think you have a case, file it, which infuriates him. But we need to be rid of Donald Trump and Trumpism. That's never going to happen. 100 years from now, Navin, there are going to be people just like those who say Hitler was right, who are going to say Trump was right. It's part of the nature of the human condition. And when the Los Angeles City Council passed a law to stop the worst police spying abuses that I had exposed, the LAPD had undercover officers in Moscow and Havana. I mean, they were completely out of control. One of the leaders of the movement to stop this stuff, not to shut down the whole intelligence operation, but to stop the abuses, turned to me and said, well, thank God it's over.
Thank God it's over.
And I said, what are you talking about? We will have a need for police intelligence 10,000 years from now. How much they do and whether they're comporting with the law, that's an endless issue. It will never go away. Most of political and social life is managing. It is not some nirvana of reaching perfection. And by the way, never forget that, at least in my view, all utopias are dystopias.
Disturbance. Fantastic. Great having you on our show, Professor David Kay. It was an honor and privilege to have you, and we shall meet again.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you,
so
and
much.
I hope your audience didn't go to sleep. Take care.